I had just moved into my new apartment, nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. It was the first time I had ever lived alone, and while I enjoyed the independence, I couldn't shake the slight unease that came with it. The silence was new to me. At night, the absence of background noise left me hyper-aware of every small sound, the ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, the occasional distant car passing by. It started on my third night there. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a faint scratching noise. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness of my apartment, it felt amplified. I paused, holding my breath, and listened. The sound stopped. I brushed it off. Probably just the pipe settling. Or maybe a mouse. It was an old building, after all. But then it happened again the next night. Only this time, it wasn't scratching, it was breathing. A slow, rhythmic inhaling and exhaling, just barely audible over the hum of my air conditioning unit. My body went rigid. I turned off my phone's screen and listened. The breathing was coming from underneath my bed. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. I slowly leaned over the edge of my mattress, peering into the darkness below. Nothing. Just the shadows stretching into the void. My brain was playing tricks on me, I told myself. I turned over, forced my eyes shut, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I laughed at myself for being paranoid. That was, until I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My closet door, which I always kept shut, was slightly open. I tried to remember if I had left it that way, but I knew I hadn't. Still, I convinced myself I must have forgotten. I had to. Because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. That night, I locked my bedroom door. I told myself it was for peace of mind, but deep down, I knew I was scared. Hours passed, and just as I was about to fall asleep, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. A text message. From an unknown number. Why did you lock the door? My breath caught in my throat. I sat up, heart pounding. My eyes darted to my closet. The door was wide open now. And from the darkness inside, I heard the faintest whisper. I liked it better when it was open.
I don't think I'll ever be comfortable living alone again. It's been months since I moved out of that apartment, but even now, every time I hear a small noise in my house, floorboards creaking, pipes settling, the wind against the windows, I freeze. My heart races, my breath catches, and I feel the familiar urge to check every shadowed corner of the room. Because I know now that sometimes those little noises aren't just the house. Sometimes there's someone else. It started about 2 weeks after I moved into my one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just little things I could explain away. I'd come home from work and find my kitchen chair pulled slightly away from the table. A light I was sure I had turned off would be on when I got back. My bedroom door, which I always left cracked open, would be shut. I told myself I was just being careless. Maybe I was too distracted in the mornings to notice these things, or maybe I had more of a habit of leaving lights on than I thought. But then I started hearing the noises. It always happened late at night when everything was still. I'd be lying in bed, half asleep, and I'd hear faint scratching coming from the walls. At first, I convinced myself it was mice. Old buildings always had pests, right? But then came the shuffling, not skittering, not the small movements of a rodent, but something deliberate. Something crawling. I tried to ignore it. I really did. Until the night I heard breathing. It was almost 2 a.m. when I woke up to a faint noise above me. My apartment was on the second floor, and the tenants above me were usually quiet at night. But this wasn't footsteps or furniture moving. It was a slow, rhythmic breathing. I held my breath and listened. The sound was coming from the vent above my bed. I sat up slowly, staring at the metal grate. The air conditioning wasn't on, so there was no reason for any noise to be coming from it. And yet, I heard it. A deep, steady inhaling and exhaling. It was too close. My body went cold. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light hit the vent, casting a shadowy grid pattern on my ceiling. The breathing stopped instantly. For a long time I just sat there staring. Then, convincing myself it was my imagination, I turned off the flashlight, pulled the covers over my head, and forced myself to go to sleep. The next morning I told myself I was being paranoid, but a part of me wasn't convinced. I grabbed a chair from my kitchen, placed it under the vent, and climbed up. My fingers hesitated on the screws. It felt stupid. What was I even expecting to find? But I had to know. I removed the cover and aimed my flashlight inside. At first I saw nothing, just darkness, dust, and metal. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw something shoved into the far corner of the vent. A crumpled up blanket. I felt my stomach drop. Shining my flashlight further, I saw a plastic water bottle, half full. And then, a pair of eyes staring back at me. My blood ran ice cold. I stumbled back so fast I knocked the chair over, crashing to the floor. My phone flew out of my hand and skidded across the room. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just seen. By the time I scrambled to my feet and looked up again, the eyes were gone. But I could hear it. The sound of something shifting deep within the vents. Something moving away. I ran out of my apartment, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't stop until I was standing outside in the cold night air, phone clutched in my shaking hands as I called the police. When they arrived, I told them everything. I expected them to dismiss it, to say it was my imagination. But as soon as they saw what was in my vent, their faces changed. They searched the building, and that's when they found it. A hidden maintenance entrance behind the laundry room. It led to the ventilation system, a network of tunnels running through the entire complex. And inside, they found evidence that someone had been living there. Food wrappers, clothes, a small mattress pad shoved into a corner, and worst of all, a hole in the vent above my bed. A hole big enough to fit a pair of eyes. They never found him. Whoever had been hiding in the vents was long gone by the time they searched. The police said he must have escaped through the maintenance tunnels when he heard me call for help. But the thought that haunted me the most was the realization that he had been there for weeks, watching me, listening to me, moving through the walls while I slept. I moved out the next day, packed up everything I could fit into my car, and never looked back. Now, months later, I still can't sleep without checking every vent, every closet, every dark corner of my home. Because now I know the truth. Sometimes the noises you hear at night aren't just the house settling. Sometimes, someone is living in your walls.
Living alone had never really bothered me. In fact, I kind of liked it. No roommates, no unexpected visitors, just me and my dog, Rocky. He was a Jack Russell Terrier, small but feisty, with boundless energy and an instinct for sensing when something was wrong. I should have trusted him sooner. It started one night about a month after I moved into my new apartment. I had just finished watching a movie, curled up on the couch, when Rocky started growling at the bedroom. At first, I ignored it. "Come on, buddy. It's just us." He didn't listen. His small body was tense, ears perked up, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Then he let out a low, guttural growl, a sound I had never heard from him before. I followed his gaze to my bedroom door. It was open, just enough to see inside. The closet door was shut, like always, but Rocky was staring at it. His growls turned to barking, loud, frantic barks, the kind he used when someone was at the door. I sighed and got up. "Rocky, there's nothing there." I flipped on the bedroom light, walked over to the closet, and yanked it open. Clothes, shoes, a few old boxes. Nothing unusual. "See? It's fine." Rocky didn't seem convinced, but after sniffing the floor and reluctantly following me back to the living room, he finally settled down. I figured it was just one of those weird dog things. Maybe he heard something outside, maybe he saw a shadow. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I was in bed when I felt Rocky move. He had been curled up at my feet, but suddenly his body went rigid. The growl, low, deep, coming from his throat. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, but I could just make out his small shape, sitting up and staring at the closet again. My stomach tightened. "Rocky, knock it off," I mumbled, reaching out to pull him back down. He ignored me. His growl grew louder. Then, a soft creak. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head slowly toward the closet. It was open. Just an inch, maybe two. But I knew I had closed it before going to bed. I stared at the dark sliver of space beyond the door. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe I hadn't shut it all the way. Maybe it had loosened over time. But then why was Rocky growling like that? I swallowed hard and sat up. "It's nothing, buddy." My voice felt small. I got up, walked over, and shut the closet door again, firmly this time. Rocky didn't stop growling until I was back in bed. That night, I barely slept. By the end of the week, it was a pattern. Every night, around the same time, Rocky would start growling. Every night, my closet door would be slightly open. I started making a point to triple check that it was closed before going to bed. I even wedged a chair in front of it once, just to see. And yet, I'd wake up to find the chair pushed aside. The door cracked open again. Rocky's behavior only got worse. By now, he refused to sleep in the bedroom at all. He'd stay in the hallway, staring toward the closet, growling softly. I was starting to feel off. It wasn't just the closet anymore. It was my entire apartment. I'd come home from work and feel like something was different. The air felt heavier, colder. Sometimes I'd find things moved. A kitchen cabinet left open, a book on the floor that I swore had been on the shelf the night before. But the worst was the night I heard whispering. I had just turned off the TV and was getting ready for bed when I heard it. A faint, raspy whisper. I froze. It was coming from the bedroom. My skin prickled as I stood in the hallway, ears straining. The sound was so quiet that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Then, a click. A slow, deliberate creaking noise. The closet door opening. Rocky exploded into barking, lunging forward before I could stop him. I rushed to turn on the light, heart slamming against my ribs. The closet was wide open. And for the briefest moment, just before the light flooded the room, I thought I saw movement inside. Something ducking away. Something hiding. I grabbed Rocky and ran. I spent that night at a friend's place. I didn't care if I sounded crazy. I told them everything. The noises, the open closet, Rocky's reaction. They tried to calm me down, telling me I was just paranoid. Maybe stress was making me imagine things. Maybe Rocky was picking up on my fear. But when I got home the next morning, my bedroom closet was open again. And this time, I saw something new. A hole, small about the size of a baseball, carved into the closet's back wall. I felt sick. I called my landlord immediately, telling him something was wrong with the apartment, that I needed someone to come check it out. When the maintenance guys arrived, they removed part of the closet's back panel. And behind it, they found a hidden space. A crawl space. With a thin, filthy mattress. Empty food wrappers. A small, rusted knife. And scratches along the walls. My stomach churned as one of the workers turned to me. "Looks like someone was living here." Someone. The police were called, but by then, whoever had been hiding in my apartment was long gone. The thought made my skin crawl. Had they been sneaking in while I was at work? Living behind my closet this whole time? Watching me? I packed my things that same day. That night, I booked a hotel. And as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Rocky curled up tightly against my side, I finally let myself think about the worst possibility. The whispering. The creaking door. That night I thought I saw movement. Had they been in the closet, watching me sleep? Had they been waiting for me to open the door? I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I've truly slept since. Because now I can't help but wonder, if Rocky hadn't been there, if he hadn't warned me, would I have ever woken up at all? The first time my landlord texted me at midnight, I thought it was a mistake. The second time, I felt uneasy. By the third time, I realized something was terribly wrong. It started subtly, just the kind of odd occurrences you can explain away. A door slightly open when I swore I shut it. Items in my apartment shifting, just enough to make me doubt myself. But it was the texts that unsettled me the most. Greg, my landlord, was a quiet man in his 50s, the kind of guy who kept to himself and only reached out when necessary. I had been living in the apartment for 4 months, and aside from our initial lease agreement, he had never messaged me. So when I got this text out of nowhere one evening, it felt strange. "Hey, just checking in. Everything okay?" I frowned at my phone. It wasn't totally weird. Maybe he just wanted to be a good landlord. Yeah, everything's good. Thanks, I replied. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. You sure? Something about the wording made me hesitate. Why was he pressing? Yeah, why? No answer. I shook it off. Maybe he had meant to message another tenant. Or maybe he was just paranoid about property damage. Either way, I didn't think much of it. At least, not until that night. I was lying in bed when I heard it. A soft shuffling sound from the hallway outside my apartment. Not footsteps exactly, more like something being dragged across the floor. I sat up, holding my breath. My apartment was in an older building, so sounds carried, but this felt deliberate. Then 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not frantic, just patient. I stared at my door. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I slid out of bed and tiptoed to the peephole. My fingers trembled as I leaned in to look. The hallway was empty. I exhaled, forcing a small, nervous laugh. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the building settling. Then my phone vibrated. I glanced down. A text from Greg. Don't open your door at night. I froze. That wasn't normal. That wasn't casual. I swallowed hard and texted back. Why? No answer. I stood there in my dark apartment, my body rigid, staring at my phone. Something felt wrong. I barely slept that night, and by morning, I had almost convinced myself it was just Greg being a paranoid landlord. Maybe there had been break-ins nearby. Maybe he was just looking out for me. But when I checked my phone, there was another message waiting for me. Are you alone? A chill ran down my spine. Yes? Back. My phone buzzed again, almost instantly. Are you sure? That was when I heard it. A noise inside my apartment. A soft creak from the living room. I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath came in shallow gasps. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the baseball bat I kept beside my bed. My fingers wrapped around the handle, my grip slick with sweat. Then another sound, like someone shifting their weight. I felt sick. I wasn't alone. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and typed as fast as I could. I think someone's in my apartment. The 3 dots appeared. He was typing. Then, his response. I know. My stomach dropped. I wanted to run, but I was frozen in place. Then my bedroom door creaked. My pulse roared in my ears. Through the darkness, I could see it. A tall shadow, standing in the doorway. Just standing there. Not moving. Not speaking. Watching me. Then, in the silence, I heard something I will never forget. A whisper. I know you're awake. A wave of nausea hit me. My hands clenched tighter around the bat. Fight or flight. I chose fight. With a burst of adrenaline, I let out a desperate scream and swung the bat with all my strength. It connected. The figure stumbled backward, letting out a sharp, inhuman gasp. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. I bolted out of my apartment, down the hallway, not stopping until I was banging on my neighbor's door. The police arrived within minutes. But when they searched my apartment, they found nothing. No forced entry. No signs of a break-in. But then they checked my closet. Inside, hidden behind a loose panel, they found a small opening. A passageway, leading into the walls of the building. Greg showed up while the police were still investigating. He looked pale. I tried to warn you, he muttered. I should have told you sooner. Apparently, the previous tenant had complained of the same thing. Hearing noises, doors left open. But when Greg checked, he never found anything. So he brushed it off. Until I started getting the texts. The building had been a boarding house decades ago. It had secret crawl spaces built between the walls. Most were sealed off. I moved out within the week. I never found out who or what was inside my apartment that night. But sometimes I think about the last message Greg sent me, right before I left for good. He always comes back.